Can't hear you all if you are talking. Hey, I can hear you now.
Oh, you can?
Yeah,
You hear it through the microphone or through the computer?
it sounds like it might be from the computer.
I'm hearing you through the computer.
Yeah.
1 second, bro. We're trying to figure out what's going on. We can hear you through the computer, but not the mic, or not the headset.
Headset. Yeah, it's all good. I hear something. But maybe testing 1 2. Testing 1 2. No.
No, look at the USB light on the mic on the yeah, it's not plugged in. You don't have a USB light on.
No. That's why.
It was on before though. So I don't know.
I'm gonna go through here.
Oh, it's back.
I think I can hear you now.
Let me get over here so I can just be the light is not on. There we go. Do a test, baby.
Test.
Mm-mm. I hear you, but I don't think it's in the mic.
Huh?
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you, man.
Change the speaker.
Okay.
Oh.
I can hear you very close, but I don't know. I don't know if that's what y'all want.
1 second. I'll do it, baby.
Okay.
Testing 1 2 3. Can you hear me?
Hey,
Yes,
Yeah.
there we go. I think it
that
got
sounds like that's from a
unplugged.
mic.
Okay.
Oh,
I
no
think
worries.
it got unplugged and from the back of the computer.
Hey,
We're not the
that-
most tech savvy.
no, it happens. It happens.
You know, damn computers,
You know,
man.
Since I got into this, my budget for like technology's increased because I'm like, oh, I need an adapter, and oh, I need
Yeah.
this special
Yes.
cord. You know.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I know.
Totally.
And we started with some really, really like cheap microphones that were just USB plugs. And then my buddy, he texted us and he was like, hey, y'all sound like garbage.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I had to get the good stuff.
Yeah, we had to
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
big or go home.
Same here. Yeah, that was the mic was my first purchase. Buying the fancy mic was my first big
Yeah.
purchase too. Yeah.
Hey,
Um,
1 second. Can you make sure we're recording real quick, baby?
It says recording.
Oh,
up
does it?
there at
Okay, I
the
can't
top.
see that. I'm old.
Yeah.
So, hey, Kevin, man, I caught your, I saw you on Twitter, man. And then I was like, toxic leadership, man, that's a freaking very centralized topic, but
Mhm.
but you could talk about it forever.
Oh,
Yeah,
man.
yeah, it keeps coming
You
up.
Dude, yeah. And
Yeah.
and some of the guests, I was kind of listening to your last episode on burnout.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, that relates to the Navy. And that's why, the other stuff you talked to, I was like, man, this relates to us, what we do.
We also did an episode on burnout, or like figuring out when you're about to burn out, because we can't just we have to put in leave 2 weeks before, so you need to
Mhm.
like know when it's about to be that point, and so that you
Mm.
can take that rest.
Yeah. Well, no, and the funny thing about how our worlds kind of connect, and I'll talk about this, but toxic leadership, there's a lot of research in the military. A lot of it, if you look at the academic literature, a lot of it's in the military. And so some of the research that I did, I cite, you have to cite. So like I cite some military people too.
Yeah,
So
that's
Wow.
true.
Yeah.
It all relates.
all relates.
Yeah,
So.
yes, sir.
Looking forward to this.
Yeah. So we're gonna start. How you want to go ahead and do the
You can go ahead and introduce him. We'll have you, we'll say thank you so much for being here,
Mhm.
and have you do a brief introduction of yourself, and then we'll
pause.
pause for just a minute so I can insert our Podgo advertisement, and
Mhm.
then we'll get into, the topics that we emailed to you. So starting with the traits of a toxic leader and that sort of stuff.
All right.
You ready to go, bud?
I'm good.
All right. Welcome everybody back to E14 podcast. with us today is Dr. Kevin Sansberry. Hey, Kevin, thanks for joining us today, man.
Hey, thank y'all for the invitation.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you. And we know that this is going to be a great episode, especially for our series, The Charge of Leadership. It just kind of really fits in there. And looking forward to getting some civilian aspects to it and see how different military and civilian is, if so. Would you mind introducing yourself for us?
Yeah. So I'm Dr. Kevin Sansberry. I'm a behavioral scientist based in Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm originally from Kansas City, Missouri, and my research is very myopically focused on the dark side of leadership. I did research in narcissism, abusive supervision, Machiavellianism, corporate psychopathy, and a variety of those negative forms of leadership. Because primarily it's invisible.
Mm-hmm.
Primarily it does the most damage to folks. And I think my topic relates to so many different people because I now, since launching my podcast in April, we got to New and Noteworthy and all of that kind of stuff. But I've been able to talk with people from India to British Columbia to Nigeria, and of course, the United States, Philippines. I've talked to so many people now who have called me and all that kind of stuff and wanted to just share their story related to toxic leadership. And so on the civilian side, it's very prevalent. And, and I'm really appreciative of hearing your all's perspective from a military standpoint, because like I stated off air, a lot of my toxic leadership literature, when I cite my research, a lot of it's in the military too. There you'll see a lot of studies that are written from the perspective of military and leadership and things like that. And so our worlds are beautifully connected.
Wow, isn't that amazing?
That's awesome.
From other countries to the military to civilian, and we're looking forward to getting into this topic pretty deep with you, Doc. If let's just go ahead and get a pause from a word from our sponsors.
Welcome everybody back to E14 Podcast. Again, we got Kevin Sansberry. Kevin, before we get deep into this, I got a question. You're from Kansas City.
Yes.
Do you miss that barbecue up there in Ohio?
I totally miss it. You can't, you bring it up these traumatic experiences, you can't you can't replicate it when you move away sometimes,
No, it's hard, man, because you don't have all the same stuff they sell up there to make that magic down in Kansas City.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So where did you get your doctorate from and all that? Like, where'd you go to school?
Yeah, I went to school at the University of Missouri, St. Louis, and got my master's at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. So I've been a part of the University of Missouri system from Mizzou. And that's actually where I worked as well, where I was an assistant vice chancellor of human resources. And so I spent a great deal of time being an actual executive and leader. I had about 4,000 people in one site and then 18,000 employees at another site. And just my experiences on the practical side, doing the leadership, being a leader, it has taught me a lot, and then I got into actually studying it, and it just blew my mind on the big gaps that we have in the business sector, at least.
Was there a situation or a boss that you worked for that got you so interested into this dark side of leadership?
No, actually, no, not at all. Originally, I was serving, I was an executive and serving as a talent manager. So I was like employee relations person. So I used to meet with everybody about their bosses and coach, I used to coach people through those experiences. Academically, what I was originally going to school for was to study serial killers and, that type of behavior. Yeah. And I pivoted. And once I pivoted, the jump wasn't that bad cognitively, because I'm actually studying the same traits that sociopaths and narcissists and stuff like that. I'm studying the same traits, except we're not like murdering people, I guess I would say, from from a comparison. That's a little dark.
I have to say that I am so intrigued, because I studied serial killers in my undergrad as well, and I just thought that their mind works so different. And then I've also dabbled, and I'm not, my master's is different. It's in management, but similar to leadership. But I've dabbled in looking at like the sociopath and the psychopath traits and noticing those. What would you say some of the traits of a toxic leader would be?
Yeah, so they come in a variety of shape and sizes. I mean, in the literature, we have terms like, so when you say toxic leadership, we have terms like, I have a construct I studied called abusive supervision. You have things, and I'll explain in a second what they are, the traits. But you have stuff like corporate psychopathy. You have narcissistic leader. There are a lot of different things you can look at, different flavors of it. It's like Baskin Robbins of leadership, I guess. And so, except there's like probably more than 31, but looking at it, some of the traits you would look at are, the way I simplify it is like, you have overt traits and then you have more covert traits. And what people typically think of when I'm talking, they'll think of things like, yelling and, slamming fist on the table and demeaning behaviors and stuff like that. Whereas a lot of the traits that people feel are sometimes those covert traits, like behaviors like puppeting, where leader plays games behind people's back and say one thing to one person, say another thing to one person. You find out they're like putting you against each other, Yeah. So like that puppeting behavior. Then you also see some covert traits like freezing. So like, say leader is mad at you, or leader, you've done something, you failed at something or something like that. Leader freezes you out of conversation or freezes you out of situation, so that kind of behavior happens too. One would argue that those covert leadership behaviors are more damaging because they tend to make the person that's experienced it feel like they're crazy, like in a gaslighting effect. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like,
oh, no, yeah.
yeah. So I've coached a lot of people who said, well, dang, I'd rather my leader just be upfront with me and just be mean, because then I know
Yeah.
they're toxic. Then I could like leave.
You'd
But,
rather
like,
the fist banging on the table,
Yeah.
because at least that's there in your face and you know it.
Well, and you have like it's real. You have like proof. Other people probably can see it, but then that covert stuff, when they're like smiling in your face and like stabbing you in the back at the same time, it's like, ooh, I feel weird about that.
Yeah, definitely. We call that and I know in the military, sometimes we call that pissing on your back and tell you it's raining.
There you go. I love that. I probably can't write about that, but I love that. That's great.
I think that, working in the military, we change bosses so much.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and then we've talked about this, the charge of leadership. So we are advanced or given people under our charge based on our rank, not our experience.
Our maturity.
Or maturity. So you have a potpourri of leaders, not experienced. You have potpourri of really young leaders who think they know what they're talking about. You've got so many different things, and it can be difficult going into these missions when they're, displaying some of these covert traits. But how do you coach people through that? How do you approach those toxic leaders and turn the tides?
Yeah, well, I mean, depending on the type of toxicity you're dealing with, your rate of success will differ based on from a time standpoint, right? So I will say, if you're working with somebody who has narcissistic behavioral traits, that'll take a little longer. But ultimately, some of the things that is important for people is awareness. Awareness is always the first step. And it's not, I differentiate between awareness and belief. I don't spend time trying to convince a leader like that my positioning or my point of view is the point of view to think about. I don't want them to it's not about, oh, do you believe this to be true? You don't start there, because a lot of people tend to try to start there to shift behavior, when you gotta kind of get through that wall first that everybody has. And that wall is defensiveness. That wall is hubris. That wall is whatever it is. And so you have to get into just awareness and, and it's like ABCs: awareness, belief, and then change. And so people need to be aware, basically. And you ask questions like, well, are you aware that this person is impacted this way? Or are you aware that this person could be impacted this way? That's different than saying, hey, you are doing something. You're going too quick with somebody. That's different. Right. So I like to go a little slower and start with awareness, because one thing that we all, whether it's abnormal behavior or not, we all can do is be aware of something. I can be aware of something and maybe not believe it yet. So then,
gotcha.
you know what I mean? And so then I
Yep.
work with the person to say, well, what do you believe to be true? Because I want to honor their perspective,
Yep.
even though like even though they have a different way of leading or they think they're right and maybe everybody in the command is like, no, you are toxic or whatever. I need them to believe it, but I have to let them believe it and give them time to believe it in a way. And so I one of the lessons learned that I have when coaching behavior change is you have to honor people and give them dignity and leave them with their dignity no matter what. That's first, because everybody deserves respect. And so when we get to the change section, what I do is put the change in that person's hands. And I say, well, what does change look like for you? Now that you've became aware, we've talked about kind of, what you believe to be true. We interrogated what other people believe to be true. And you do see a gap here of success or whatever success is. Because, typically a lot of people who have toxic traits, they're not trying to be a jerk. They probably, a lot of times people don't know it. And I'm talking about in most cases, right? And so I put change in their hands and say, well, what does change look like for you? How can we best this situation? How can we improve whatever? And it's in their hands. They have the power and agency to change. And so that's typically that's a basic, very 40,000 feet high level process that I take people through of shifting behaviors.
That's interesting.
It is.
I like the simple 3-step view, that people can take with them and think about.
I like what you said about you have to make sure they maintain their dignity.
Yeah.
I like that because I tell you what, because I've been in the Navy 25 years. So I've seen some, lack of better word, jackasses in my day. And some of them were under me, right? Ranked under me. I had some, not say power, but I had some rank over them, right?
Sure.
And if I told them, hey, you're being a dumbass, this is not working. They're quick to be like, you know what? Screw this guy.
Yeah.
But if you sit there, you talk to them like a human being and say, look, this is where we need to change, I think.
Yep.
This might get you better results. And they're way more open to it because they still have their dignity. You're not saying they're doing a shitty job. You're saying, look, I see a way of getting better results out of the guys or gals.
Yeah. Yep. And so some of the times what tends to happen is leader has a toxic leader they need to talk to. So leader becomes toxic themselves to eradicate another toxic person. So I'm like, how is that working? That doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, that's two wrongs don't make a right.
Exactly.
Two wrongs don't make a right. Exactly. Right. And so with that being said, leaving people with their dignity and all that, you're actually honoring that person's humanity. And what that basically means in simple terms is you're giving them the power and you're giving them your belief. You believe they can change. So you're putting it in their hands. You're trusting them. You know what I mean? That goes a long way, especially for people who are not, there are some people who've been conditioned to lead a certain way. And so, somebody else's sergeant or commander or what have you, they could have treated them like that. And that's what they learned. That, you know what I mean? That's what they respected them. And they're respect, I'm putting in quotations, they might have feared them or been coerced to do something. So that's all they know. And so how do you change that? You change that by showing them another way. You don't change that by being toxic yourself. Right.
I mean, that changes a lot. That's a game changer when you treat, like you said, when you treat people with respect and dignity, give them their dignity, and they're gonna almost want to be like, let me see if I can. They almost want to please you because they have respect for you the way you talk to them.
Well, I'm so glad you said that they learned from that leader before them, because that's primarily what we see in the military. Since you're a young leader coming up, maybe you put on the rank fast, and then you're like, well, I'm not quite sure how I'm supposed to lead all of these people, but I know this guy yelled a lot, so that's what I'm going to do, and just tell you how to do it. And then it just rolls downhill and downhill, and we're molding each young sailor to lead that way versus learning different ways.
Definitely. No. And I always said I learned more from bad leaders than I did from good leaders.
Amen. Yeah.
I mean, I learned a lot from great leaders. I've had some great ones in my day that were that top notch all the way. They could lead in any environment, but I've had some crappy ones that I just say, look, I can do really bad, but not be as bad as that guy. I just won't do what he does or she does, and I'll be fine.
Yep.
And we kind of blew past the traits of the toxic leadership. So I just kind of want to circle back to that, because I know we threw out some terms like narcissist. And then you said another one that I can't quite remember.
Yeah.
But can you kind of define some of those traits and what they look like in a person?
Yeah. So I'll boil it down. I don't want to go through each one because everybody
Right.
can Google, and we don't want to do a
Right.
lit review today. So one of the
Right,
things I'll
right.
say is the common traits you're going to find in a lot of these toxic behaviors are simply behaviors that are destructive, behaviors that bring people, relationships apart. They're breaking them apart. They're distancing. And so you can look at yelling, that's distancing. You can look at backstabbing, that's distancing. You can look at puppeting, that's distancing. Some traits that people should be aware of are like, especially in narcissism and Machiavellianism. Machiavellianism is after Niccolo Machiavelli, the book The Prince. That's where that came from. And basically that was a book that described how basically people can gain power through these political manipulations. But really, what that Machiavellianism looks like is people who are kind of more self-centered and gain power and want to gain power and authority by looking out for themselves and manipulating others. So those are other behaviors you're going to
Okay.
see. Yep. So people that do those power plays that you can tell they're always trying to climb the ladder or whatever that is, and they're brown nosing, and then they like manipulate to get their way in extreme cases. Narcissists are delusions of grandeur. They're myopically focused on their own success. They're only focused on their own needs, stuff like that. A lot of here's another trait to look for in a lot of these leaders. They're highly charismatic.
Huh.
So in a lot of the toxic traits, you see a lot of charisma. You see a lot of that because it's a form of manipulation in a way, because that's how they stay in power. That's how they know who to kiss up to. They know where the power is. It's kind of like that movie The Predator, where they can like see in night vision and thermal vision in the jungle.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I feel like some of these toxic leaders like can see your whole platoon or company in thermal vision. They know where all the power is, and they like can talk their way out of anything,
Yeah.
to keep that power. And so very, very manipulative comes up a lot.
And that's
so
funny because that's the way serial killers are too. They're super charismatic.
Yeah.
Just a side note over there.
It's crazy because
It's the
everybody I've known to be a narcissistic type personality or person, they just, you got it, you nailed it. That's textbook.
And that I was going to say that too, Heath, because every person that we have met, you could literally go to the textbook and say, well, this is how they're going to react here. And this is how they're going to react here. So it's not that they cannot even manipulate their own toxic trait, because it is textbook the way that they react to everything.
Sure.
I've done in the Navy, they have, Article 15, where you go see the skipper and he can bust you down a rank or whatever. That's like a non-judicial punishment, right?
Sounds scary.
Yeah. They got a whole lot of power.
Article in front of it, right?
I mean,
Article 15.
Yeah, Article 15. So before
serious.
that, they have something with the senior enlisted guys. It's called the DRB, Disciplinary Review Board. They kind of they question the kid or the sailor. Then they decide they recommend if it should go all the way up to see the old man, the skipper, or can it be taken care of at a lower level?
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's kind of like, hey, can this kid be saved before you go see the old man? It's just something we do as senior enlisted. So I remember sitting in a couple of them, and I've told the head enlisted guy, I said, yeah, this guy's a narcissistic type personality. He is going to be back here. And I don't know, I just picked out, he was there 6 months later, he was right back where he started.
No way.
It's just like whatever, he couldn't own it that he screwed up. He just couldn't own it. He couldn't be like, he had but this and this. I said, dude, you're butting us all day, but you got to own it or you'll never recover. But it's funny because that dude who I'm talking about was a narcissistic person.
And we have to think about, some of the things that could be harmful is you're putting these people out here to lead people.
Yeah.
And in times of stress, these toxic traits actually come out more. I can't think of anything it's more stressful in the workplace compared to war,
right.
And compared to combat, you know what I mean? So like the stressors you all go through are extreme. And so I want to make sure that the people I put in charge have the least toxic types of, personalities to lead people, because they're going to come out more when you're in the heat of the moment.
And definitely, it's not just war. I mean, it could be just deadlines for anything.
Absolutely.
Last minute, we call it last minute BS that comes up, in the military arms
Mhm.
world. It's all stressful. I mean,
Yeah.
I've never,
Yeah.
we're in the Navy. I've never been face to face with somebody who wants to kill me, eye to eye. But
Mhm.
there's been some stressful things out to sea.
Yeah.
But you're definitely right, because it could be anything that's outside your normal routine that could just make those people spin up through the roof, and then
Yeah.
they're out of control.
Yep. Yeah, and I've met a few, like, I mean, I've my career has spanned a few different industries, and I've coached a few people who were former military. And one of the things that I've seen in some cases, military are very chain of command, right? I've heard it. I know y'all know that
Yes.
term,
Yep.
right? One of the things that I see that people tend to forget about is the chain, and they tend to focus more on command. And when I say the chain, what I mean is, hey, toxic leader, we are literally all in this together. We are literally a chain. You know what I mean? Like, for a relationship standpoint.
Right.
Yes.
No, definitely.
And I think people tend to forget about that and focus purely on the command, because I have the power. I'm the skipper.
Yeah.
I'm the way, I have that it's called positional power in the research.
Right.
And sometimes this positional power goes to people's heads. And I, in the research and through my own, through my research and others, we all exhibit some toxic behaviors, all of us.
Yeah.
Different flavors.
Right.
I think sometimes some people have a predisposition where positional power does go to their head, and they use it and they overuse it. Some people just have that predisposition. And so for people who are that way, they need accountability and they need support.
Right. And you try being I've seen people make chief in the Navy, which is pretty senior, at
Mhm.
25 years old.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it's happened. They join the Navy, they make it fast, 7-8 years.
Mm.
You can't tell me a 25-year-old gets all that power. They don't go to his head a little bit, or her head a little bit.
Correct.
It's going
Yes.
to.
Yeah.
You can't help it. You grow into that position sometimes.
Yep.
My gosh,
Yeah.
I have never viewed the chain of command as a chain. I've never heard that.
Mhm.
No, it's actually a
And
great insight.
wow, that is so.
Yeah.
I mean, because if you are that toxic leader, but you're the weak link, it
Mhm.
doesn't matter if your subordinates are weak links or you're the weak link. It only takes one weak link to bust the chain, right?
That's
So
correct.
wow.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
then I know in a lot of your episodes, Kevin, that y'all talk about, focus on lack of productivity,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of different, factors that can happen with toxic leadership.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You can't keep people hired for more than a few months where they drag up because I can't take the BS no more.
Yep.
And that in the Navy, obviously you can't quit,
I can't leave. Yeah.
I mean, there's ways to get out, but people don't want to sacrifice the rest of their life for a few years of bad leadership. Right. So
Correct.
there's ways there's steps to take, but and before you take those steps, you can have at a division or a department or whatever at the top of their game. One person
Mhm.
comes in and can drag that shit down
Oh,
to the depths of to the depths down below, like the ocean floor.
Yep.
For lack of better terms.
Yep.
And it only takes one person. And it's
Absolutely.
funny how, you see it coming, but it takes forever to do anything about it sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of times in systems. So whether it's an organization, whether it's a military, whatever the system we're thinking about or talking about, in systems, we tend to overemphasize and believe what we can see and what we can measure. And that's why a lot of times, a lot of the toxic behaviors you're going to see on the news are things that are very overt.
Yeah.
But
Mm.
millions of people are facing the covert things that are behind closed doors, that are less visible. Second, how do you measure somebody who is pissing on my back and calling it rain? How can you
Yeah.
measure that? You know what I mean? Like,
It's
you
hard.
know, it's hard, right? But you as a person going through it, know exactly what's going on. You feel it.
Yeah.
And so part of me, when I think about what we need to do differently, there needs to be a little more emphasis on different forms of data being real too. So like your experience in whatever system this is, your experience needs to be valued, and you need to have opportunity to talk about it too.
Yeah.
And so if I'm part of that chain, in order for us to stay a strong chain, we need to have formal and regular communication up and down that chain to ensure that we're strong. Because like come under pressure, that wink, link, or bust it.
That's right. Because what's the biggest downfall of anything, any drill you run or any kind of thing you do in the Navy? Communication is always the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure it's like that in the civilian world, that communication is a lot of
Absolutely.
time is the problem. In a
Absolutely.
marriage, why do people get divorced? Communication.
Yep.
It's the biggest,
Always.
it's the most important, but it's the biggest thing that people let go to the wayside.
Yes, totally. Any like communication is kind of like one of the bonds that bring us all together, that puts us all together. So it's like, it's not only just like one of the things I tell people is communication is not just talking. It's speaking the same language and also listening. And when I say speaking the same language, I'm not talking like ethnic language or anything like that. I'm saying, let's say I'm a person who I'm not good at being confronted in a conversation. I want some time to process. That helps me. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Well, my person who wants to tell me something could send something like, send me a quick email. Hey, this is what I want to talk about. Blah, blah. I mean, because again, what I try to tell people is, if your goal is to convince somebody, again, ABC, awareness, belief, change. If we're trying to convince somebody to believe what you are saying, talk to them or communicate to them how they want to be communicated. Right. Not how, you know what I mean? Yeah, not how you are comfortable communicating.
Right.
And so, so I know some people in power are like, oh, I just, whenever I got to do something, I just go to them and talk to them and confront them. Well, I'm like, okay, well, what if you just ruined it? What if you basically just made it worse? Like, I'm saying, I believe, let's nip it in the bud and all that kind of stuff. But I always tell people, as we're trying to evoke change, think about the optimal way to get there, not the fastest, mm-hmm. not the way you would do it, not the way you would want to do it. Think about the optimal way, how they would want to, to be treated and things like that. And that's how we treat people equitably.
Right. And
I'm so glad you said that. I was just about to ask that question. And how do you go about finding that awareness? Do you just turn around and say, hey, I know that you are pissing on my back and telling me it's raining? Or do you email them? Do you text them? How does it?
Yeah, you just I'll talk from a leader standpoint first, and then I'm gonna talk from like a follower standpoint. So from a leader standpoint, you need to know your people really well. Yes. When I had a team, I knew like their preferences. I knew how they like to communicate. I knew how much they like to communicate. So I met with them at different times. So some people I met with every day. Some people I said, hey, we'll talk in 2 weeks because that's what you need from me. Some people, I was a very equitable leader. Mm-hmm. And so that's from a leadership standpoint. So knowing from a leadership standpoint, I will know that one person wants to just talk it out. I will know that another person wants me to send them something in writing or a text, and they want some time to think about it. Like I'll know different people's preferences. That takes time. That's more difficult. I understand that for listeners. But if we're talking about the platinum rule, treating people how they want to be treated, that's how you do that. That's different than the golden rule. And then from a follower standpoint, let's say I'm following a leader. How do I do that? Well, there's this thing called managing up. Managing up is basically like an intelligence mission, right? You want to basically find out as much as you can about your person you report to, especially if you switch bosses a lot. You want to know what makes them tick. You want to know what their preferences are. You want to know what's their best mode of receiving information too. Because just because you're following somebody doesn't mean you don't have power yourself. You have, you know what I mean? So what I tell people is, you being a follower, you reporting to somebody, you have power to control how you're treated. And so what I tell people is, find out how they need to be communicated to, and you go that route, follower, and talk to that leader. And I'm saying follower because leader, follower is how we talk about it in the literature. But it goes both ways. And so that dignity, that respect, and to be honest, that power, there's different power at every different angle, whether you're a leader or a follower, you both have power.
Wow.
That's awesome. Great. That's awesome. And circling back to what you said before, about understanding how your subordinate or your follower wants to be talked to, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. I tell you what, you can stroke your ego all day long. Yeah, I'll go and talk shit to him. I tell him exactly what's on my mind. But at the end of the day, you're judged by your results.
You are. Yep.
So what's going to get you the best results, which is going to make you better. Yeah. And get you in the good graces of your bosses.
Well, and I always tell people, just because you got a result doesn't mean you got it. You know what I mean? Because like you could get through it. You know what I mean? So here's one thing. we could say you need to do X, Y, and Z. Person does X, Y, and Z. But let's say I treated them better and I communicated to them in a different way. A lot of times, especially in my line of work, people do X, Y, and Z, A, B, C.
Yes.
People will go above and beyond for people they believe in. People will go above and beyond for people they trust. And if you're yelling at me and I don't trust you, I'm literally gonna do the smallest amount of work not to be yelled at again, I'm running away from something.
Yeah.
I'm in survival mode. And so what I tell people is don't be blinded by success. Don't be blinded by the myopic bare minimum result. Always look for how can you inspire people to go above and beyond. And that's not going to be through coercion.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, that we see that so much. And I'm a recruiter. We see that so much. You get that, we've got to meet this goal of 10 people. Okay, well, I'm going to get you 10 people, and then they press for more, but through the coercion, they press, and we're like, nope, I got you your 10. You can't yell at me.
You can't yell at me.
Yeah. And so I see it a lot in recruiting because of the way that the leadership comes in. And, I'm not saying everybody's a bad leader in recruiting. I'm just saying I see it a lot because of the deadline to meet that goal. And everybody is heightened, and it just is very stressful. So I could totally see that.
I'll tell you what, Kevin, there's a reason I've been in 25 years and never recruited. That's a tough gig. That's a tough gig.
It sounds tough. Yeah, that sounds tough.
So, as we get ready to close out this show, I wanted to ask you if there was someone that was moving up in the leadership realms, how could they not become a toxic leader? How could they develop these traits? Well, you said we all have these traits, but how could they not heighten these?
Well, humility is one of the antidotes that I talk about. It's not magic, but it helps. Humility is kind of an opposite and will kind of counteract something called hubris, which is that overconfidence and that ego that people talk about as it relates to leadership. So one of the things I say is the best leaders are the ones who ask about who check in and ask about what their impact is. So for all leaders who are in leadership roles or moving up those ranks or whatever, put the ego aside, put that hubris aside. Ask the people who report to you, hey, how am I showing up? How am I showing up? Or is there any, are there any needs you have that I'm not meeting? Ask these types of questions to your people and be good about it. And here's the thing, you got to leave that ego at the door so you don't get bruised. But just take all that feedback as a gift and use that to be even better. And the key to know is this is not, okay, I'm going to talk to everybody who reports to me and I'm one and done, because people change. You get new people, show up differently. And so this is a continual practice of, when we talked about communication. It's a continual practice of communication. And one of the things that I see lacking in a lot of toxic leadership relationships is a healthy upward communication.
Wow.
Nice. And I'm going to translate that in Navy terms for anybody who's listening. So you have the semi-annual midterm counselings. You have annual evaluations, and you have career development boards. You have several opportunities to ask that question.
I got a lot.
What can I do better as your boss or as your chief or as your leader? What can I do better?
Yeah.
And honestly, you're in a closed office and you're making it relaxed. Most of the time, if they have something, they'll tell you.
That's good. And I like the different forms that y'all have formally to have that conversation. And so people using that to their advantage is to their advantage. And I think if we want to be, the best leaders we can, we have to lead by influence. We have to lead by being transformative. If we continue to lead by coercion, we're leading by toxicity. And that's going to get us the bare minimum results.
And I'm gonna tell you, Kevin, I like what you said, man, about knowing your people, because you can't do that behind a desk all day.
Oof, yeah.
You got to get up and walk around, right? And kind of.
Please do, yeah. Well, and that's the leadership is like one of the best jobs if you want to learn and you want to learn about people. Leadership has really nothing to do about command and control. Leadership is really influencing and inspiring. You take the C's and turn them into I's, influencing and inspiring, because if I'm influencing and inspiring, if I'm a really awesome leader, I actually have to do less command and control. That actually is reflective of how well I'm doing. If I'm commanding and controlling, I'm not doing my job as a leader. I'm missing something. Something's off. And so I always tell people, like some leaders, like, oh yeah, I'm on them. I'm walking around and I'm on them. I make sure, no. If you were really the leader, the best leader you could be, you wouldn't have to be on them. They'd be on you. They'd be like, hey, give us more work because we got all this stuff done. You know, they'd be like, hey, you know what I mean? Like that's what you'll see. That, and but people don't. When I tell people that, they don't believe me because you don't see it as often. So
right.
You know, I had an admiral as a young sailor tell me one time, and he drew a triangle. And he said a lot of people think, and you know, admirals, they're very high ranking, they're very high on our food chain or chain of command. But he said everybody thinks that when you're an admiral, that you sit on top of the pyramid or on top of the triangle and you rain down on everybody else. But he said, actually, he turned the paper upside down. I work for all of these people. And he's at the bottom and everyone else. So it was like an upside down triangle. And that really stuck with me because I thought, wow, the more rank and the higher you get in leadership, the more people you actually work for.
That's well said. And I think if listeners, you know, literally take that visual and post that on our wall somewhere, like that's the way to do it. That's, yeah, I love that. It's a definition of servant leadership right there.
Yeah. And we just thank you so much for coming on with us. Would you please give us some of your plugs for your podcast and your social media?
Absolutely. So I can be listened to on the Toxic Leadership Podcast. That's toxicleadershippodcast.com. Any questions anybody ever has about toxic leadership in general, I can be reached at askdrkev.com or 346-38-TOXIC. And that number is 346-38-TOXIC. People can text me all around the world. And then I'm available on all Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, things like that under at Dr. Kevin Sansberry.
Hey, thanks again, man. Please hang out for a second after we're done. I'd like to pick your brain.
Yeah.
A couple more minutes before we call it quits.
Yep. And we'll wish you fair winds.
And following seas.
That was so awesome, man. You're just a wealth of knowledge, Doc. I appreciate that. And it's so intriguing to me. I'm such a big nut for that kind of stuff.